Hello everybody, we're going to be talking about the next part of the course. We're working towards two questions. We're looking at what Islam was like in Makkah. So when Muhammad started receiving his revelations from the angel Gabriel, from Jibril, what it was like. How do the ruling Quraysh tribes respond to him? Because they're in control. They're making a lot of money. They're quite powerful. They're the bosses of the town. And if somebody else comes along with a different message and challenges their way of life and their power base, there's going to be problems, basically. And so we're going to look at what happened here, and we'll talk about, is there a possibility that Islam could fail in Makkah as well? So let's have a look at the first kind of slide in here. So today we're going to learn about the reaction to Muhammad's revelation when he informed the people of Allah's message. A little reminder then, so Makkah is the holiest city for Islam. It's where the Kaaba is, it's where the idols were, it was a centre for trade, and it was a centre for where the different tribes and peoples would come, they would meet, they'd worship different idols, and therefore there's a lot of trade, a lot of money exchanging hands around that area. So next slide. So little recap really. And so Muhammad's main message was there was only one God, monotheism, and this was completely against what they did at the time. Pagans worshipped spirits of the desert, and all the different tribes had different gods and goddesses which they followed. If you accept this is true, you have to follow what he tells you as well. So if Muhammad is a messenger, you have to follow what he says as well. So that's why it's a problem. And this involves banishing the customs, what the tribes used to do pre-Islam. So the time of Jahiliyyah, which was the time of ignorance before Islam, that whole way of life is going to be sort of put in the dustbin, if you like. And so that's why it's a problem. The first people to accept Muhammad's message were Khadija, Abu Talib, which was Muhammad's cousin, Zayd, Muhammad's adopted son, and Abu Bakr, which was Muhammad's friend. A little quote at the bottom from Tariq Ramadan, a famous Muslim scholar. So he talks about Abu Bakr particularly being a really key involved figure at the time, supporting Muhammad, taking action, helping him out, and so on. And so during this time in Makkah, after the initial revelations had taken place and he started receiving the Quran, there was about 3 years where Muhammad was preaching to his followers, quite a small group at this point, quite discreetly though, so people weren't aware of it. The rest of the public wasn't really aware. He was just at a kind of small scale. The believers knew if they went public, they would face exclusion, they would face hostility, they would be possibly attacked as well. Hold on. We don't want to do that. Oops, sorry about that. And then the believers knew they would face exclusion and hostility if this kind of happened. And so the Prophet had given priority to quality over quantity. And the community contained people from different social categories and tribes. And so Muhammad's next job is to go public, which he does. And so he warns people. He says this is going to be possibly bad for us, and he starts telling people in Mecca about his faith and about Islam. So this slide sort of takes you through a little bit about what the Quraysh says and a bit about the history of it. So we're told that Muhammad took a place on a high rock. He had some people listening to him, and different people come up to him to kind of warn him. He criticised their religion, he criticised their morality, and this started to get him kind of enemies. So the Quraysh, the leading tribe in Makkah, had a choice to make. So they decide to try and stop Muhammad. So it will be quite easy for them to initially kind of crush a small group like this, but they've got supporters and friends and family who are following Muhammad, so they don't really want to do this. They want to take a more nuanced approach. So they try to bribe, they try to threaten him, and they use torture as well. And so we're told that the Quraysh approached Muhammad, and we're told that Abu Talib did not openly declare to be a Muslim, but supported his nephew. And so he's the uncle which protects Muhammad. And so him being there is really important, because he protects Muhammad as part of the Quraysh. So the first quotation on this slide says, Muhammad has scattered our ranks and has created dissension among us. He has laughed our intellect down and has ridiculed us and our idols. If he has been prompted to do so on account of his poverty and indigence, we are prepared to place enormous wealth at his disposal. If he wants status, we are ready to accept him as our ruler and we will listen to him. And in case he is invalid and needs medical treatment, we will bring him an expert physician to attend to him. This must have been very attractive to Muhammad, but he didn't. And so he replies to this approach by the Quraysh, and he says, I don't desire anything from them. As against these 4 offers, they should accept one word from me, so that under its auspices they may rule the Arabs and make non-Arabs their camp followers. He also said, I swear by Allah that even if they place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, I shall not stop from telling people about this religion and shall continue my efforts until I overcome the difficulties and achieve my final goal or lay down my life for its sake. Okay, so there is a final attempt where they try to convince him to stop preaching. So they're worried about giving up worshipping their idols at the Kaaba, and they're also worried about the cost it's going to be. So the pagans no longer having their gods and a big sort of change in their way of life. We'll sort of skip that one. Okay, so some further reasons why the Quraysh wouldn't accept Muhammad's message were jealousy. Some felt they were better prophets or were more intelligent or better speakers than Muhammad. The ethics, they didn't like the idea of Judgment Day, because if that's true, you've got to change your behaviour. It also means your ancestors possibly going to hell. And if you don't want to give up drinking and gambling and having a good old time, that's going to be a problem for you as well. And then also many of the other prophets, they worshipped Jesus, David, Moses, all of the prophets that go back through Judaism and Christianity. They've come from Syria, Palestine, Israel. Why is there a messenger in Mecca? There's a really nice little bit that explains this part of the story in the BBC Two documentary on YouTube, The Life of Muhammad. It's part 1 of part 3, and it's 43 minutes to 46 minutes. So I would have a look at that as part of your studies. Okay. So what happens? So they start to persecute him. This is the early Muslims being attacked by the Quraysh, a powerful tribe of Mecca. They mock him, right? They insult him. They call him a liar. They call him a magician. They call him insane. They try and humiliate him. There's stories where while he's doing his prayers, they put a rope around his neck and they drag him through the streets. There's assassination attempts where they try to kill him, but he's protected by his companions. And there's also torture which takes place. So one of his early followers, Bilal, had a boulder placed upon his chest, and until he renounced Allah, but he refused. He replied, the one, showing he worshipped the one God, not many of them. However, Muhammad and his followers did not stop, and Islam continued to grow. At this point, we know he also sent followers to Ethiopia and started to get a small Muslim community going in Africa, which comes into play kind of later in kind of a story. And so the Quraysh put some sanctions against the early Muslims to make it difficult for them to live and trade and so on. And so they ban people from trading with Muhammad. They say there's no marriages between supporters of Muhammad and their tribes, and they start to support people who didn't agree with Muhammad. At this point, many of the Muslims had to move to the valley of Abu Talib. So this is a remote area outside of Makkah where they set up tents, and they have a really bad time actually living in tents, not much food, no one's going to trade with them, and so it's very, very difficult for them at this time. They had to live on scraps, they even had to eat grass, and this lasted possibly about 3 years. And so this is very, very hard for the early Muslims. Meanwhile, some of the Makkans found this boycott to be too harsh and wanted to stop it. So several people supported this, and eventually the sign on the Kaaba was torn up, and Muhammad and the Muslims were free to return. During this time, there was the Year of Sorrow. And this is a point when Muhammad loses 2 of his most loyal kind of followers. So Khadija passes away, Muhammad's wife, and also Abu Talib, which is his uncle who was protecting him as part of the Quraysh tribe. With him gone, the Quraysh are free to attack Muhammad and to attack the early Muslims as well. Also during this time, we have something called the night journey. This is quite an interesting part of the story. Some Muslims take this as metaphorical, some take it as a kind of literal story as well. But we're told during one of the evenings when he was praying, he is transported on a winged horse to Jerusalem. While he's there, he meets Abraham from Judaism, Moses from Judaism, Jesus as well from Christianity, and he leads these three prophets in prayer. And this shows his sort of superiority or his position as the seal of the prophets. He's tested with a choice: milk, water, or wine. He chooses milk, and this is meant to show a middle path between these two kind of extremes, a middle way. And he's also taken up to heaven, and he's taken to hell as well, as part of this. And so, as part of this, it was a discussion about prayers. We're told that he's meant to pray 50 times a day, or even possibly more, even 5,000 times a day. But he negotiates the number down to 5 instead. And so this is where one of the pillars of Islam, 5 daily prayers, kind of comes from. And so this brings us back to one of the questions: is it possible that Islam would have failed in Mecca? There's lots of reasons why it could have done. The reaction of the Makkans to Muhammad was very negative, and then it could have stopped Islam developing straight away. He was criticised for his idolatry, his customs, and the traditions of what was going on in Makkah, the drinking, the gambling, their behaviour, all of it. And they were concerned about what would happen if Muhammad stopped the idol worship. People would stop travelling there. That would cost money. So it did take a long time before Islam started to spread. There was these secret preaching years, and then this time outside of a city. There's 3 years in total when they're really, really struggling. His message is treated as a warning, because he does criticise how people are behaving. And so if it's affecting the lifestyle and the power of the top tribes in Mecca, that's going to cause him problems. Some people argue, this is an alternative line of argument you can make, is that maybe these stories are exaggerated to seem the religion more fantastical, maybe, to give it more validity as well. And then a very important line of argument, though, is because of this, they are forced to leave. And this leads us into our next discussion, which will be called the Hijra, when the early Muslims go from Makkah to Medina, and this is when Islam really starts to spread. So because of this persecution, it forces them to leave, and that's when Islam really starts to spread, and that's when the early tenets of Islam are set up, for example, the 5 pillars of Islam. And so, in a conclusion, you could argue that any new religion was going to face resistance, although he faced many pressures from the Makkans, but the Hijra allowed the faith to start to spread. And Muhammad had support from powerful friends, and you could argue that Allah was on his side as well.